Okay, so before we get started, and I know the anticipation is building for our main event, I wanted to ask people what is their experience level with JavaScript, since that's the focus of today's meetup with Jeremy. So, yeah, good to know people's levels there. Wow, this one's very diverse. I think that is all the information we had before we get started, and wanted to introduce Jeremy. So yeah, Jeremy Brown is a JavaScript expert. I would say you put yourself in the expert category, and he is going to present on all the JavaScript we can do in FileMaker. So Jeremy, I'll let you take it away from there.
Hi, everyone. I am Jeremy, and you can see my screen. You can see me here, just confirming that. Yes, thank you, Kate. Well, welcome. I'm excited to be here. My name is Jeremy Brown. I'm the only person that works at Integrating Magic. I went from a really big company at Saline Consulting to a smaller company at Proofgeist and Geist Interactive to just me. So my trajectory is very funnel-like, but I'm glad to be here. My goal, Integrating Magic is all about building integrations, and for people, whether it's JavaScript widgets or APIs or whatever the case may be. I'm not really proficient in Salesforce, but pretty much other things I can do, and it's really a fun job to just focus completely on, in this case, JavaScript. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I have a bunch of slides, and I'm going to try to control them. Let's see here. The goals for today, I kind of try to just start off with some sort of statement, and I'm interested in your thoughts of this right away. So I do welcome discussion. Anything you can put it in the chats or just yell it out, and I'll be glad to hear what you have to say. But it's my impression, it's my understanding, belief now that because JavaScript is so prevalent in the web world, and because it is so well a part of FileMaker, the FileMaker Pro client and Studio at some point maybe, because of those two facts, and because JavaScript solves problems for clients in a rather, more modern way, it's really worth exploring for a FileMaker developer all that we can do in JavaScript for FileMaker. That doesn't mean we need to be an expert at FileMaker or at JavaScript. We just need to know what we can do in JavaScript that works for solving use cases for FileMaker. So it's my opinion that every FileMaker developer could dabble in some JavaScript. And as I looked at the chart there, of the people who responded, only 4 haven't started working with it. So it feels like we agree with this. Do you all think that, just curious, pipe up or chat it out, but do you see JavaScript as something to invest a time in for a generic FileMaker developer? What do you think? Yes, I see a lot of yeses. Okay, I forgot there's 2 chats going on, so I will attend to both of them. So, but thank you for speaking up. Yeah, so that's my statement, and it's kind of what I run my whole company on. So the basic frame of how I approach things is that if we're going to spend time working in JavaScript and really wrap our heads around the language and how to work with it in FileMaker, we need to focus on not all those cool things that can be done, but things that actually help solve client problems. Again, that's what I do, is I build widgets for people, whether it's a table that shows data in a list view of sorts, or a chart or dashboard or whatever. The goal is not to make something pretty just for the sake of being pretty, but to solve a client problem. So we want to be most efficient in the things that we learn. And so we need to focus on that. back when I first started this, I created a file called the Web Viewer Integrations file. I think it's still on Sciline's site. I'm not sure. Obviously, it's 6 years old by now, I wouldn't use it at all. But it was my first attempt to really focus on what is useful for a FileMaker developer. Hey, thanks, Tim. So my goals are today will simply to be inspired what is possible. I don't want to overwhelm anybody, even the 4 people who have never used JavaScript. In fact, you're the people that I want to achieve goal number 1 on. And I want to give my support to you as a fellow journeyer in JavaScript for FileMaker. That's my entire business. It's the only thing I do. I have a whole community of people that work together to learn JavaScript, and I do other things. So I want to, throw that out there. And for those 4 people who are haven't used it at all, I want to maybe have a stretch goal here to inspire you, but also then to help you start along your journey. And for those of you who are just beginning or basic, that's Michael, that's 5. We'll get you on the next step. In fact, let's look at this one first. So here's the chart that I just grabbed this quick screenshot. It would be great if we moved everybody up starting today and just kept moving people up in this chart in the categories, so that people have a chance to really get good at it. Once you get decent at it, once you're able to understand what to do and put together the things, you will find it much more efficient and easier to use. So even Phil, I know we don't have time. Everybody says that we don't have time. That's to learn it. My goal is to show you that it is pretty possible to spend some time and learn it. And by the way, you're all experts at FileMaker. You can spend the time learning that you used to do on FileMaker, you can spend that on JavaScript. I guess that's what I would say. And just remember that we're always starting from, when we're working with JavaScript in FileMaker, we're starting from a web viewer object that was introduced in FileMaker in 8.5, long before I joined the community. But this thing has so much power to do a lot of things. And so it's nice to have a starting point. We have that, and of course, then we have the web viewer on display that people can look at. So that's just the starting point, and that's where we're going to go. So when I think about JavaScript and FileMaker, and I think about how it's integrated, I realize that it's only good for 2 parts of FileMaker. It's only good for the user interface, designing user interfaces, and it's good for complex, large calculations. So this is where JavaScript lies inside of our FileMaker world, and this is where we can reach for it once we are, on the journey. You don't have to be an expert at this. I'll probably say that 500 times. You don't have to be an expert at this to start using it. But once you get on that journey, you can start using it in these 2 areas. The cool thing is that these 2 places inside of the FileMaker platform are rather large. We design user interfaces all day. We want to design interfaces that perform well, that interact well, that provide some feedback or some ability to view whatever they need to see. And of course, under the hood, and sometimes in scripts, we're doing calculations and such. JavaScript doesn't deal with data structure. It doesn't deal with security. It doesn't deal with extended privileges or any of that stuff. It just focuses on these 2. So we don't necessarily have to think that JavaScript is going to take over my entire FileMaker app, because it's really just limited to a couple of things. What JavaScript brings, and I'll see if you have other thoughts about this too. In my mind, in the way that I evangelize this, is that it brings much more interaction, much more, I would say, modern interaction to a FileMaker app. I think that people expect when they go on the web and they fill out a form, they want to see buttons change, or they just expect that nowadays. When they look at a chart online, they're wanting to interact with it in some way. Definitely brings speed. JavaScript is by far much faster than FileMaker when it comes to the calculations. If we're using JavaScript to perform complex calculations, which I have a couple examples of, it's much faster, and it gives us much more. It brings a lot more performance to what we're doing, and of course, complete control. There's so many times when people are asking for, so much more control over a chart object in FileMaker, or a list view. They want to add more features to it, or the date picker, whatever. It brings JavaScript allows us to completely control what we are presenting to the audience. So to me, and again, want to hear what you have to say about, for those of you who have used it, what does JavaScript bring to your table, to your apps? Who has a thought? You can put it anywhere and talk to me about that.
I thought of typing it in, but maybe I'll just say it since somebody else is talking. I use it as a way to standardize script parameters. It allows some flexibility, and it's much cleaner than the old pair parameters model.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree there, Mike. We did the same. Parameter passing. It has made it so much easier to parameter pass between scripts.
And specifically, that's JSON. JSON is sort of a part of JavaScript. As we get better at JSON, we are getting better at working with JavaScript as well. So you're tapping into your programming abilities. You're tapping into what you can know about JavaScript very well. So there's a lot of examples that people are coming up with. Great. I'm going to show others here. But that's the goal, is to just provide an overview of hopefully all that we can do in FileMaker with JavaScript. Let's see, what can we do? So JavaScript in FileMaker, that little web viewer object that I'm sure everybody, when they first started using it, they put in MapQuest or Google Maps. I don't even know if that's possible. They put in some sort of mapping feature. That was probably the first thing we did. Kyle, you said yes. I don't know if it was to mine or to that, but that was the first instance that I used of it. I was very proud to have a map inside of my student database that I was developing. But there's so much more that we can do with it. Here is just a quick list of, and I'll show some examples of these later on, but we can take this little web viewer object and we can write just ordinary HTML, CSS, JavaScript. We can write it in a code editor and so forth. We can also use big name frameworks that control an entire web app, like React, if you've heard of that, or Vue. The add-ons in FileMaker 19 were built with this React framework that just adds a lot of what they call state and controlling data so that it flows naturally and that it updates automatically. The fact that when you add a record to the events table if you're using the calendar add-on, and then eventually that shows up on the calendar without you having to do anything, is part of what React does. So we can use what millions of websites now are using on their frameworks to build their code. We can use that in our little web viewer. Plugins like MBS and Base Elements both have features that allow us to run JavaScript without the web viewer, for sure. But it is possible in FileMaker. I don't particularly use those. I don't find any constraint around having to use a web viewer to do complex calculations, but it's completely possible. We can bring some of the more modern styling frameworks to our apps, to our user interfaces, like Bootstrap and Tailwind. You may not know what any of these words mean. I'm going to show it to you over this time so that you can see that. And of course, many people have mentioned this, Jessica and others. There are a zillion, I think Jessica has counted them, right? There are a zillion libraries out there that that allow us to tap into what the features of that and build something pretty awesome for people. So it sounds like a lot of people are using some libraries. That's great. I'm going to demonstrate that and show that here as well. Also, with FileMaker 19, almost every single problem that ever has been around for the web viewer since 8.5, since it was introduced, has pretty much been solved. FileMaker 19 really pushed, they did a lot with that web viewer under the hood and exposing things that we can use. We'll take a look at those. But it solves the problems that we were wrestling with for many years. When I worked with Todd Geist, we built that FM, the GoDraw app, and we were limited to what FileMaker 18 could do, and 17, and I think that's when we did that. There were a lot of problems, but FileMaker 19 solved all of those. So if we're on FileMaker 19, there's almost no boundaries, no reasons why you can't use JavaScript other than time. Here are the problems that were solved with FileMaker 19, just to get it all out there. Developing the code. Oops, I'm going to go to this one first. So here are the big problems that were solved. So we can now very easily send data back to send data from FileMaker into the JavaScript. It's a piece of cake. It's a script step and then some code over in the JavaScript. Easy enough. Again, I'll demonstrate all this. FileMaker 19 allows us to, without any problems, get data back from the JavaScript. When we click on a row or click on a bar, we are able to send that data, the row clicked, back to FileMaker very easily. FileMaker 19, specifically on the Windows side, helped us solve the next two problems. We can now debug and show errors in our code much easier when we have access to the developer tools of the web viewer browser. We couldn't do that in Windows in FileMaker 18, but in FileMaker 19, I think 0.2 and higher, we can do that. As well as using one of the bigger problems of working with Windows is that we had to use old versions of JavaScript. That because it was an IE 11 based web viewer, we were stuck with using the code, the JavaScript language that IE, Internet Explorer, could understand. And now that it's gone, we don't have to worry about that anymore. This was an interesting one that I still hear about once in a while as, questions on it. And I can't remember specifics of this because I just don't care about it anymore. But limitations of data transfer, I believe before FileMaker 19, especially on the Windows side, we were really stuck with the number of characters or byte, I think it was characters that we could pass to the JavaScript, even the old ways, especially again on Windows. So it solved a lot of problems. We can send thousands of records now to the web viewer with tons of data in it, in each record, and the JavaScript will render just fine. And then the last one, of course, using the web viewer inside of WebDirect and iOS, those problems have been solved, again, with FileMaker 19. So, and then here are some other problems that I have been working to solve, not just me, but people in the community, building frameworks, building ideas, writing blog posts about it. So here's some other problems that people, again, have really honed in on. Now with FileMaker 19, because we have FileMaker 19, we can develop the code easier by focusing our attention to a modern tool like Visual Studio Code. We can use an actual code editor to write our code. I'll demonstrate this, and we can work with it in FileMaker easily. When we develop the code over in that code editor, we can see what's going on in the web viewer right away. I'll demonstrate all this in just a minute. When we're ready to, we can deploy the code when we need to update the code because someone asked for a color change or something of the chart series, we can redeploy the code. And this is one that I'm particularly interested in, is what JavaScript to learn. I struggled a lot with figuring out what JavaScript I needed for FileMaker to work in. But in my mind, I have solved this problem because I have struggled. I've gone through it. I have learned how to write a function and how to create how to create buttons on the fly in the web viewer. I haven't learned everything about JavaScript. There's still stuff that I'm not quite familiar with, but that's not important because the use cases that I've had over my last year of business and many years of working at other firms, I've used the same techniques over and over and over. Thank you, Peter. We're going to get to that. And so I'll show the JavaScript to learn in just a bit, but I think I have solved this problem, and I encourage you to come along the path that I learned with the trail markers that I've put out. And then, of course, what libraries to use. We could probably spend 2 hours just talking about the libraries that people have used that they would recommend for another FileMaker developer. So that is that. So here's my thought. And yes, it's biased. I'm certainly biased in this. Because all of these problems have been solved, and because we have modern tools like VS Code and GitHub and NPM and stuff, don't worry about it now. Because we have all this stuff, it's almost we are missing out on one of the better tools that we could use to build interfaces in FileMaker. Not full screen, everything is an interface, but a widget, a date picker, a chart, whatever, a menu selection kind of thing, whatever. We are missing out if we don't take a little bit of time. There is nothing hard about this. The only thing that is difficult is finding the time. But I think, I have some ideas for that, and we'll talk about that as well. So I don't know. I mean, I think I'm starting to get people around. I'm all in on this. My whole business is based around the fact that people can learn JavaScript and should learn JavaScript for FileMaker. So if I'm still here in 3 years, I will have been proved right. All right. So I want to just dive into some various topics to show Peter and other people were interested in this web viewer refresh. I want to just go through some more slides showing you different ideas, and then I'll get into some live coding and we'll see how badly I can mess up in front of you all. The JavaScript development environment is one of the ways that we can solve problems of working with JavaScript in FileMaker. This environment that I champion, that I've worked on with other people and have kind of it's come out of my time with Todd especially, is the way to solve to write code as efficiently as possible. We get to write all of the JavaScript. No one else worries about writing it for us. We, as a FileMaker developer, get to write it, and then we get to see it render in a FileMaker file right away. The 3 problems, I've mentioned these before, but this is what this environment solves, and is designed to make this as easy as possible. The first one is developing. We as a FileMaker developer can pick up VS Code and we can start to type in it, and we can start to use all of the features of a proper code editor to develop the JavaScript that we need. I used to write these in text fields and struggle with getting my organization right, forgetting a comma, not knowing where the comma was missing. This code editor takes away all the issues of working with JavaScript in just a text field. How many of you have written JavaScript? Those of you who have used it, how many of you are using JavaScript and you're typing it into an actual text field? Is that still prevalent in our community? If you are, put a +1 or something. Peter, +1 to writing it in there. Do you love doing that? Or you're just saying you're doing that? Okay. All right, Michael, you too. Jonathan, using do not love, using VS Studio Code and then pasting it in. Good. So development portion of this JavaScript development environment allows us to use a code editor very nicely into to write our JavaScript. The second part of this is rendering. Whatever I'm writing in VS Code, when I save it over there, it immediately shows up here in this web viewer that's inside of a FileMaker app. There's a connection built between this web viewer and the VS Code that's running a development server that makes it possible for me to change a color on the fly over there in the code base and see it render over here. I mentioned a FileMaker file. This one is actually in a client file, a job tracking file. It's actually a demo of a real file, but it's meant to be a proxy for a real file. So it gives us a chance to see what we're doing, just like browse mode, layout mode, just like any of the time when we get to see. When I'm typing in a text field, I have to type, pull my cursor out, commit the record, and then the web viewer will reload. That's way too much time. I'm always having to commit the record. It's just a pain. So I'm writing now in JavaScript and in VS Code, and it's fine. And the last one is when I'm done working in VS Code, I can, this development environment is set up so that I can run a little command over in the code editor down at the bottom there. It might be hard to see, but I'll demonstrate that. And once I do that, I'm making a change here to the environment here. When I run a little command, it will package up all of the code that I have written, and it will take it and push it into that table there, into that HTML field, that then can be read by the web viewer itself without having VS Code. So there's all my code. It's packaged up as small as it can go. And so now my chart, without development mode on, without VS Code on, I can run it, just quit everything. I can run it and it works. Good question, John. Is it not also possible to use local files to store HTML, JS? Well, a local file would be a problem if your file were hosted, right? And I actually don't know much about doing it locally. I have picked this method of doing it, putting the code inside of an HTML table inside of a field, and I'm just running with it because it's, we all have preferences tables. We all have tables that store stuff that's not data, that's preferences or configs or something. And so I'm choosing to use that model to store the code here. It might be possible, Jonathan. I don't actually know. It'd be fun to explore that. Other people have actually deployed their code to a server, and then the web viewer here in their FileMaker file reads from that server. That's great. That might be possible. This is the most friendly, the most accessible way to work with JavaScript and FileMaker. I don't have to worry about having a server or deploying it or making sure the cores is, I don't even know what that means, what I just said. So I'm sticking with this for now. Does that sound good, Jonathan? All right. So this environment here allows you as a FileMaker developer to code as efficiently as possible and to get your code into FileMaker and used by your clients as quick as possible. I do this day in and day out when I'm building widgets for people. It's really quick. And again, if they have the code, if they have changes made to the code, like changing the line from orange to yellow or removing the dash, I can easily edit the code over in VS Code and then redeploy it in a half a second, and it's ready to go. So that's very good. So the development environment is there and it's available to use. I can walk through it here. I do have some documentation that describes this. All right, there we go. So I do have some documentation, jsnfm.com, and it explains why to use this environment and then how to get yourself set up for this process. I will demonstrate, for the fun of it, I will demonstrate a walkthrough of setting up a C3 chart because that's what I can do in my sleep. But you do have to prepare your computer for this if you've never set up a GitHub account or you haven't installed a couple items. So I won't show this, but I do have videos on my YouTube channel that demonstrate this as well. So I hope that answers the question that I saw in the chat. But I'm, again, now that I've talked about this, I have to support this. And so anybody that needs support on this is free to ping me and we'll get you set up. Okay, so those are the problems solved. And I now want to talk a little bit about, what do I want to talk about? Another reason why working with JavaScript and FileMaker is possible and is easy, and why we can tap into all that JavaScript can do for us, is because there's patterns that there's patterns of working with JavaScript and FileMaker. It's actually pretty, it gets pretty monotonous because I'm doing the same things over and over and over to make amazing widgets for people. I build tables all the time and charts all the time for people. And it's just like, boom, 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 these steps over and over and over for myself. The patterns are listed here. There's roughly 6 of them here. And as you start to work with the JavaScript, I think I will demonstrate these here quickly or just walk through them. You'll use these patterns over and over and over. So the first one is loading the code. When the way that I'm choosing to do this is the code is stored in a particular field, in that HTML field. And this script called load web viewer is actually going to get the code from that field in production on line 6 there, if you can see that. And it is then loading it into the web viewer on lines 12, 13, and 14. So this is my procedure for loading the code. And that development environment that I showed comes with this script all ready to go for you to put into your own file. And I do actually have a video showing how to take what's in this environment and connect it, put it into a real app. And there's instructions there as well too. The next pattern is loading the user interface. So if I've developed a nice chart, I want to make it run and make it visible to my users. So on line 7 there, I am declaring a function that is in the JavaScript. And on line 19 there, I'm actually asking FileMaker, hey, go into that JavaScript in this web viewer and cause this function to run. This function looks like this. On line 3 there of my VS Code and through line 50, everything that's inside of that function is going to be rendered when FileMaker tells it to, when that script step runs. This is a pattern I use all the time to make my chart render, to make the data table render, or whatever. So this is one of the patterns. These are a couple of the patterns, and I use them over and over and over. And again, my development environment is set up for this, for you to use right out of the box. The next thing is loading the user interface. So inside of this function is all of the code that will make the chart render. And so it's got like, a type, a data type, a chart type there. It's telling it what colors, where to put the chart. This is inside of my function that just runs it. So every library, every implementation of JavaScript, all of the code goes inside of this function, and whatever's in there will load and cause the chart or the widget to render actually. So another pattern is sending data to the JavaScript from FileMaker. We can do that in here, right down there on line 19 again. Actually, in line 9 and 10, we are going to fetch some data from a subscript that goes and collects data or does the FileMaker data API script step, whatever, to get data. It returns it to this parent function, and then that line 19 sends the data into the JavaScript via the way that FileMaker 19 allows us to. My function will receive the data, it will process it, and then it will cause it to render in the chart. I'll demonstrate that here because I'm missing a couple slides. But that is how it's done. In fact, why don't I just bring up one right here. So I'm going to go to this right here. This is VS Code. And I'll show the FileMaker file in just a minute that comes with this. But here is that function that I mentioned that gets called by FileMaker when FileMaker decides when it's ready to. So load table, and I'm passing a bunch of data, a bunch of records from FileMaker to the JavaScript via this argument. Just like in our functions in FileMaker, we have parameters. This is the parameter that comes into JavaScript from FileMaker. We process it a little bit here because it has to be processed. Again, I have all this information in detail on my JS and FM site. And once it comes in, then the data table gets rendered. So if I open up the FileMaker file and I just let this run. So what's happening is in the script, this load web viewer button, the load web viewer button goes and gets the data right here. Then it puts it into a JSON object here, and it passes that JSON object into the JavaScript right here. So if this button is pointing to the customers table and it's getting data from here. So when I hit that, it will go fetch the data from there and pass it into the web viewer. And if I hit this one, it will load the data from the other table, the final admissions data, and it will push that data into the JavaScript as well. Obviously, there's some other things going on with different columns and stuff, and that's beyond what I want to explain here. But my point is the data can come from FileMaker very nicely because of the pattern that we have right here. All right. Let's see, and that's good. Let's see, let's keep on going here. We can also take data. Another pattern is actually clicking on a row and passing the data back to FileMaker. I'm gonna just go to the customers. If I load this this fourth one here, if I click on it, I can pass that back to FileMaker. And I get the primary key of that row. And I have the layout that it's on in particular. The pattern is expressed here. The library asks us to do a couple things to add a click on each row, just like we would add a button under the data in a list view or in a portal. We have to add that to the row. But the key point that I want to focus on, and this is the pattern that we know from FileMaker, is that FileMaker has given us a script, a function. They actually have injected a library into my web viewer on runtime when I load it, one that's called FileMaker, and they've got a function in there that says perform script that will actually run a script that I have in my script workspace, and it will pass data back into it as a script parameter. Peter says, looks like your example is refreshing the entirety of the HTML each time. Can we just update the data to render somehow, or are you getting to that? You can refresh data by sending the rows data updated. Yep, for sure. Yeah, in my example, I'm just getting a whole two new sets of data, so it makes sense to refresh the whole thing. But if I wanted to, I could develop more and go into refreshing that particular row. So it's completely possible, and I think I have an example to show that as well. But this pattern is what's essential. This script right here, get data back from JS, is right here. And it receives the data from the JavaScript, which I think is astounding. That's just incredible that we have that connection. We used to use FMP URL, and when we would have to put parameters, it was a real mess in FileMaker. And again, here's where some limitations happened in how much data we could pass back to FileMaker from JavaScript, from the web viewer. So it receives the data, and then it parses out what it wants, and then it displays that. It does other things. It goes and finds that record, whatever the case may be. So that is a pattern. And as we do this over and over, we'll get used to the patterns of JavaScript and FileMaker. I actually wrote about this on my blog, which is on my site, Integrating Magic, and it explained these in much more detail. let's keep on going, and then I'll actually get to some demonstrations to show, Peter, what you were asking about. But I also wanted to talk about learning JavaScript. I think that's pretty dang important. For those people who have never started working with JavaScript, or you are just at a basic level, actually, if you're at a basic level, I would bet that you pick up these ideas here, you pick up these patterns. If I would advocate using this in development environment, and then your basic JavaScript will get you very far. We'll take a look at some libraries in a bit and understand libraries, but you will get very far if you start. If you haven't really focused on the JavaScript language, you don't have to know everything about it in order to be successful. I don't know everything about JavaScript, and I'm fairly successful at doing this. I still have to look up documentation on how to do a particular thing, but it's possible. So what I did over a couple of years ago now is I sat down and I said, you know what do FileMaker developers really need to know? And I kind of mapped out this. Yeah, Jessica, that's correct. I mapped out this, I call it a learning path. We can think about, and I've listed here, but if I thought about the things that I do normally in JavaScript, and I picked out the parts of JavaScript that help me to do those things. Like the first one is, move this out of the way, is performing actions. When we are FileMaker developers, we're writing buttons, creating scripts. We need to do that in JavaScript a lot. So here is the stuff in the JavaScript that would be helpful for us to explore. We don't need to know everything. We just need to know how to write a function. And so we could take this blue path. We could go look up documentation, go take a course and study this part of it and apply it to what we're doing in FileMaker. So there's a few things that we would need to learn. The next one here, it's a little bit hard to read, is the manipulating data one. I spend a lot of time taking data from FileMaker and manipulating it to make it fit into a particular JavaScript library or to make it work for whatever implementation I'm trying to do. And I'll show that in a minute here. So we need to study how to manipulate objects, arrays, how JavaScript works with dates, especially if we pass it in from FileMaker, how it works with numbers and strings and so forth. And then there's other ones here, loading data, retrieving data. Those are what I think is a good course for a FileMaker developer who doesn't have much time, but she's interested in learning JavaScript. This is the stuff that she should take on and spend her time looking at. So people could take this. This is not a very good, I need to update this image, but yeah, you could take this and start learning stuff from here. Adding it to the framework makes this even easier, but here it is. Here's an example. In my training course, actually, we spend time on manipulating data. This before data over here in the yellow is 100 records of data that came from actually that data table we saw a minute ago. And what I teach the students is we take this data and we can manipulate it. And then we can do something in the JavaScript to change how the data is structured. In this case, I start with that before, with that field data property, and I reduce it down to just the two key value pairs that I need. I don't need all of that junk in the original, the orange section. I just need the company and the state for a particular implementation. So I manipulated the data and I just created a new version of it. Yeah, that's a legitimate use. I do this all the time to reconstruct the data. Here's another example. I take data, the original source of 100 records, and I go and I filter for just a particular set of records. In this case, I'm looking for just the records that have a state of California. So I'm using a built-in JavaScript function to filter the data. Then yeah. Jonathan, you say it is much faster to use native JSON functions than using FileMaker native functions. You're right. If I were to try to do this in FileMaker, it's definitely slower to go through all 100 records in this array and try to filter for the ones that are in California, for sure. Yes. So this is where a calculation could come in. I could potentially take this found set of records, process it in a web viewer, and send it back to FileMaker in the form there on the right. So there's that. All right. So there's an example. And actually, we took this a step further. We took with these 100 records, we did some filtering, we did some reconstructing them, and then we also learned how to build buttons so that at the end of our time in this course, we actually were able to sort all of those 100 records by state and then put buttons for each company, create a button for each company, and then add a click method so that when you click on like the Walter LLC there in Delaware, it would go and find that record in FileMaker. So this is just a nice, I think it's practical. I think there could be some use for this. People ask for horizontal portal rows. This is kind of that. This is definitely a very dynamically created portal. But this allows me to get, how many, if we were to do this in FileMaker, we would have 50. Actually, there's 37. I think there's 37 unique states. We would have to have 37 portals, each of them filtered, and then we would have to had a button behind each one. JavaScript can handle that in half a second, can reconstruct this from that basic 100 records. Cool. All right. So this is the stuff that would be useful for FileMaker developers, and this is the stuff that I work with people in my training and in other places that I'm at. So that is that. Now, talk a little bit about JavaScript libraries here. I'm looking at my sections to see what's next here. And then we're going to hit some resources, and then I'll do some live coding again and show you the process all the way. At Auto Enter, I did a video on how to implement a chart in 25 minutes or less, because that's all the time we had for our videos. I could do that here. I could at least get started very quickly. A library, JavaScript library, if you've never seen one, looks like this roughly. It's just a bunch of code that I have no idea what it does. I have no idea how it works. All I know is what it does. What it does is what's described by the author, what's written in the documentation. I don't know how it works. I just use it in my implementation, and I'm ready to go. So I can take this code and produce an awesome chart with it, with data from FileMaker. A library, we always consider the safety of a library by looking, pretty much we kind of look at GitHub and we say, number one, how many stars does it have there on the top right there? And how many issues does it have? Are the developers fixing it? Are they fixing bugs? This has 723. This actually hasn't had a whole lot of development, but it's been a stable chart progress it's been a stable chart implementation for me for the last 6 years. So I continue to use it. Libraries are safe as long as someone doesn't know FileMaker. Sorry, I'll say that again. JavaScript libraries are safe. They can't directly interact with FileMaker. It's only through those connections that I showed earlier. So we're pretty safe in using libraries. And people in my community, I see Kyle is here and others, they know a lot of libraries that they have used and found success with, so that, so we can kind of start to build a repository or a collection of libraries that are great. If you're interested in a chart library, here are 6 that you could use. I would recommend 2 of them because I'm most familiar with them, whatever. But this is what we think about with libraries. The patterns of JavaScript libraries are this. I'm big on patterns. I use these patterns over and over. It kind of takes away the guesswork from what I'm doing. Every JavaScript library, we have to install it in some manner. We have to access it in some manner. Once we've installed it and are pointing to it, we can then call the library's functions and start getting them to do things. Every JavaScript library has a function that generates the widget, whatever it is, but it also asks you, what options do you want for this particular library? In my example here, I'll show you this again. This data tables here, here's the function called data table. It's a function because it's got the parentheses after it. right here. And inside of this parentheses, I'm adding a parameter, basically an object of options. I'm telling the data table how many rows I want you to render at one time on a page. I want to tell it how tall to make it. No matter how much data you have, the area where the data table will always be 500 pixels tall. I'm telling it what the columns are and what the data are. So these options are present in every library. And the sooner we see that and we start going, oh, here are the options, I know what to do with them. Okay, so we have that. Those are one of the patterns. We also, every JavaScript library comes with the options I mentioned, and the documentation describes what options you have. This is where that complete control comes in. If you've ever complained about the colors of the FileMaker chart object, here is where you get a chance to control it yourself. And we did that. Benedict joined me for his training, and we changed colors. He did a bunch of interesting things to his chart using these options. So we have options. We have complete control over it to the benefit, but also it could be what do they call it? A time sink for sure. And what is, to me, to answer some questions earlier, most JavaScript libraries have an API that we can tap into its internal functions, and we can cause things to change. In this charting library, we can actually send new data to it to let the chart refresh with new data without having to wipe out the whole web viewer and blank out the screen. That's very jarring to people. So you could add an install timer script if you wanted, or there are other methods, but every so often new data goes into the chart through these APIs. And when Ben joined us, we learned how to change the chart type from a FileMaker button. So tapping into the APIs, it gives us the ability to add some nice interfaces without, especially modern ones that refresh. All right. It is magic. These libraries are magic. And even though we FileMaker developers love to dig into a custom function to see how it works or whatever, it's just not necessary in this case. These libraries' codes are pretty unreadable by the human eye, and that's okay, because we have the documentation and we have the APIs to tap into what more it can do. So let us, here, I'll do that and go back to my web viewer. So thoughts or questions? Kate, do you want me to wrap up at some point, or could I do a quick demonstration and see how far I get?
Yeah, okay. I think we still have time. That'd be really great to see.
The idea, we got to look at resources. So I want to talk about resources. This FileMaker community is filled with JavaScript resources. We are wising up to the fact that we need to know some JavaScript, and people are putting a lot of content out there. Kyle is here. He has mentioned a couple of things that he's done. He's got his own YouTube channel. Sorry, I don't have you on my sheet here, but here's a ton of resources that I've used that I've seen around the community. Carafe is another setup of working with JavaScript and FileMaker. It's Don Hetty did a presentation at AutoEnter about that too, so you can check that out on a data table integration. I mentioned the MBS and the Base Elements plugin. And FileMaker Magazine does some great stuff showing various implementations of JavaScript. There are tons of blog posts out there now about working with JavaScript and FileMaker, solving some of those problems before FileMaker 19 came out, and then once it came out, how to handle that. So there's a ton of great stuff. Productive Computing did great work on videos on each of the add-ons and talking about how to extend those. And of course, questions and discussions in the Claris community itself. I see more questions coming up every day, and it unfortunately, those questions always seem to be popping up when I'm walking my dog, so it's hard to jump in there and answer the question. Thank you, Michael. Beeswax with a B. My computer changed that here. I'll change that right now. Sorry, Beeswax. Let me fix that right now. There we go. There we go. Okay, great. So it's becoming more prevalent. People are asking more questions about it on Facebook, in the community groups, on Stack Overflow. I'm seeing a lot more, and of course in the community. Part of what I am trying to do is build a community around this, working with just JavaScript and FileMaker. I have a whole community called community.jsnfm.com where people can go and be part of questions, examples. I do office hours every Wednesdays at 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. like right now on Wednesdays. I've got my documentation site, and then I do have some courses that I have put out there as well, and I'll show those in a bit. But these are the resources that I'm cultivating with help from Kyle and other people that we're trying to support people that are into JavaScript, that are learning JavaScript. I see Mary Jo is here. She's a recent joiner of the community, and I think is starting to get a lot out of that. Hi, Mary Jo. How are you doing? You're still here, right? Yeah. So this is my focus. I no longer care so much about primary keys, which kinds of primary keys to use is the best. My goal is to just support the community in working with JavaScript and FileMaker. First one is the community. I'm happy about this. We've got about almost 200 people that are joining me, and I need to continue to up the conversation, but we've got that. My documentation page that describes a lot of what I've been doing now, and just especially how to work with JavaScript, that development environment, and also what JavaScript we could learn to be effective in FileMaker pretty quickly. So I have links to a lot of documentation that describes these things. I've even got a couple of starting templates. This is the one that I did for auto enter. So you can work through this and put a chart into your next client project in about 30 or 40 minutes. I do have some trainings. I have to point those out. I actually have 3 different courses online right now, but I've got a JavaScript and FileMaker. That's what Ben and other people have done. It's 12 hours long, and we go through all of this in detail. We go through a lot of this at the surface level, and then we continue to talk afterwards. And people who are part of the course are also diving into it on their own. I've got one that I just put out there called Create the Perfect List Viewer Portal. We design a data table from scratch, replacing one of your list views or portals. We make it work exactly how your project needs. But I do have one too that's pretty short. It's completely free. It's just this JavaScript development environment. I'm going to walk through it here in a second, but you can come and join me. There's a couple, there's at least one. So there should be one that I have. Oh shoot, I don't know where it's at. I do have one coming up here. I'll make sure that it gets on here, that you can join me, and we'll get you up and running with this JS Dev environment. If you're using JavaScript and FileMaker, like Jonathan, you're using VS Code, this might be something to explore, how to work with the JS Dev environment. It is pretty much just walking through the documentation, but it is with me, so you get lots of good support. So there's that. All right, so I'm going to quickly walk through the JavaScript development environment and just get it set up, and we're going to get as far as we can in 11 minutes. I have a template called the JS Dev environment that I use for every one of my widgets that I build for clients, that I build in trainings and so forth. So I start with this widget by taking the template, and I'm going to create it as a repository on my own account. I'll just give it a repository name. This is all covered in various videos I have on my YouTube channel, as well as in the documentation. I'm just going to go through it at real time for me. I've got all of the code that is part of that development environment. So now I'm going to clone it to my machine. And I'm going to do that by clicking on, there we go. Opening up VS Code, cloning the repository, bringing it down to my machine, putting in a certain location. Ben, the more you've done this, the easier it's gotten, right? It was a little confusing at first, but you've gotten the hang of this, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and yeah, it really is usable, and yeah, you just need to keep doing it. But again, it's so easy now; it's second nature to me. Thanks.
So once I have it down on, thank you. Once I have it down on my machine, I install it. It gets it running. It makes the development server run so that the FileMaker file can read it. I quickly start it up so that the development server will run. Then I can open up the FileMaker file. Let's get rid of that one. Just focus on that. All right, so the FileMaker file that was in the VS Code right here is now opened, and I can start to do my development. I can go over to VS Code and go to the index.html and simply copy a line. And you can see right over there in FileMaker, it's already updated itself. There we go. So now it's ready to go. The JavaScript is right here, and it allows me to, change some JavaScript. If I click on this button, it says you ran some JavaScript. But I could come over here and say, dang, this is cool. Make a change, save it, and I might have to reload it. It's not a big deal. I can reload it, and I find that that update has happened. All right, so, this is what I do in my course, but I'm just going to do it here with us here. I'm going to go to the browser and go to C3. I'm just going to go through it really quickly and get it set up. First thing I'm going to do is install it. So npm install C3. It's going to go to the internet and find the C3 library and make it part of this, this setup. I'm in my JavaScript, I'm going to import C3 from C3. That way I can access it. Okay. After I've got that, I can go back to the documentation. Oh, you didn't see that. Sorry. Sorry. Here's what I did. I imported, I installed it. Then I imported it right here. I typed this line. This makes it accessible to my JavaScript so that I can now write code in this space, and it will access all of the functionality that's part of this library. The JavaScript tells me, or the getting started tells me, I'll just go to the getting started. It tells me that I need to create a space, a div element for the chart to be rendered. So I'm going to copy that, go back to VS Code, go to the index.html, remove all this extra stuff, put the place where the chart will be rendered right there. Then back over to the browser, it tells me, here's the function that I need to run. This is a great getting started. I can copy it, go back to VS Code, go to my index.js file, paste that in. It doesn't like that I'm using the variable const, the var keyword. So I'm going to change it to something else, to const. And now, when I run this, npm starts, when I start it up again, I go over here to FileMaker, I click on it. Oops, I got a mess of some C3, some styling. So I just have to fix that, and I know how to fix that. Actually, I don't know. I forget what it is. Again, we do all this in the training, and I teach people. These are the patterns that you'll get used to as a JavaScript in FileMaker developer. So copy that, paste in the CSS, and there we go. So now I have a chart. Jacob, you asked import versus require. I prefer to use import if the library supports it, just because it's more modern, I think, than require. And it's just what I've been using. So if it works with import, that's great. So folks, ladies and gentlemen, I've got this set up. Now I can, I could go further. We got a few minutes left, but I could actually then follow those patterns of FileMaker in JavaScript, take this data out of here, put it into the FileMaker, and then send this data through to the web viewer to be constructed. And actually, I'm going to stop there because I'm going to go to chart. This is one that I just did with some folks. let's do this one because it's more complete, I think. Yeah. So here's one I did together with some folks. This is an older version. Yeah. So if I do an npm start over here, I'm in development mode, by the way. This is me as a developer working on the code. Here's my chart, looks beautiful. I can actually, here's an example of me tapping into the JavaScript's API. If I hit transform chart, it will change the chart. I can reload, add more data to it easily. But without VS Code, I'll just finish off with this and say, I'm done developing. I can stop the server from running and run that little command, npm run build :upload. It will take all this code and bring it over into this FileMaker file, into this HTML right here. So I'm going to clear this out just so we see it in action real time. Let me run it again over here in VS Code. There we go. It populates with the latest code. And now I can go back to the chart, quit VS Code completely, and I've got it working, for everybody to work with. So this is the development environment. This is how you as a FileMaker developer can start to work with JavaScript because all of those problems have been solved because of these modern tools. Gives you a chance to fully explore how to use JavaScript to solve client problems and, to have some fun, try something new and give it a try. The discussion, the training courses are available. Encourage you to try those out. Join my community, ask questions, come to my office hours. I'm always available to talk this stuff. All right. So thank you for your time. It was fun to talk with you. I appreciate the support. I see a lot of good questions and the good links and resources out there. So thank you so much. Talk to you later. Or I'll stay on. But all right, Kate. Thank you.
Jeremy, thank you so much. That was really awesome. And I personally learned a lot and I feel really inspired. So I think that's a really good sign of a user group. I see everybody's thanking you. So this was really awesome. And thank you for being our very first speaker of Claris Beyond.